Good morning. It's a beautiful Saturday here on Cape Cod. Hope everyone had a good week. Going to talk briefly today about some data that popped up as I was preparing my weekly note for institutional clients, which is titled Trumponomics on the Ropes ? So I don't want to make too much of this data. GDP data, personal consumption data, subject to revision, very noisy, but the data at this point does show, as I noted in my last video, that the top line's pretty stable. Nominal growth, low fives. I think the Fed would be making a mistake to mess with that at this point. Unfortunately, under the hood, there's a pretty consistent deterioration in the growth inflation mix. So the 5-3 quarter by quarter seems to be comprised of slightly more inflation and slightly less real growth over, say, the last 18 months pretty consistently. And of course, this phenomenon looks even worse in Q2. We don't have GDP, but we have the personal consumption expenditure on a monthly basis through May. And the energy shock, really had that effect of goosing the inflation component and depressing the real growth component, which is exactly what the textbook would say we would see in the event of a supply shock. So this is potentially a big problem for the Trump administration because, of course, they're espousing this idea that they're creating this big real potential growth boom, but we're not seeing it in the data. And I've been skeptical, frankly, because the policy cocktail has both supply positive and supply negative facets to it. Immigration is obviously a big negative supply shock. Now, there's a socio-political argument that maybe justifies the policy, but the economics are what they are. And, I'd say the same for trade. My preference would have been a 10% across the board tariff and stuff that into a reconciliation bill and make room for more tax cuts to offset the negative supply impacts of the tariff. Didn't really see that. Tariff policy has been a mess, sucked a lot of the political energy out of this administration, and I just think was a big own goal. So I think that's been a depressant to the supply side. And, I think the most underrated problem with this Trump policy mix is the tax cuts really suck. So, yes, immediate expensing is some boon to investment. For a 30-year asset, maybe you're getting like an 8% discount up front on the cost of investment. Very helpful on the margin. But for 12-year investment, it's not that big a deal. And we wasted a lot of fiscal room on things like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, which have very minimal supply-side benefits. So, the offsetting positive supply shock from tax cuts has been overrated, I think. And deregulation, I don't know. I can't see it, touch it, feel it, and we don't see it in the data yet. So this is a real problem if, in fact, the Trump administration policies are a drag on real growth potential. Because now that 5-3 nominal, when the energy shock reverses, as it is, thankfully, we should see that core PCE going from 3.3 back to 2.7 or something. But if that doesn't happen, then they have a huge problem because now you're going to force a tightening in a situation of sub 2% real growth. Really damaging. So the Trump administration, both strategy and execution, have been lacking to this point. I think if they can turn the negative energy shock into a big positive energy shock, and I think we're going to have a glut of oil in 6 to 9 months, that will help. But there's a real question mark as to whether this administration has set itself on a sound footing for the second half of Donald Trump's term. So we'll see. I'll have some updates as more data come out. Again, I don't want to draw too firm a conclusion here, but so far not so good from the perspective of the Trump administration creating a supply side boom. Just not seeing it in the data yet.